Good morning. Hello to those of you joining us online as well. My name is Joe, and my pronouns are he and him, and in this body of Christ metaphor, I would like to think that I'm some kind of tendon or ligament, making connections, holding things together. If you have a different image, please keep that to yourself. Last month, current U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert Kennedy, held a press conference about autism. Kennedy, as you may know, is well known for promoting misinformation linking autism with vaccines, which has been thoroughly researched and disproven by the scientific community. So when this press conference was announced, people were skeptical of what he would say about the latest report from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. This report was about the rising numbers of autism diagnosis in the US. Well, this is a loaded topic for sure. And Kennedy did not disappoint. He mischaracterized the results of the report and called autism an epidemic, and that is intentionally misleading. Autism is not contagious, and it is not a disease. And the report that Kennedy was announcing notes itself that the increase in diagnosis is most likely due to increased awareness and testing. They're now identifying autism in children that previously would have gone undiagnosed or would have been misdiagnosed as something else. So that kind of selective misinterpretation is pretty common from Kennedy. What was shocking was the way that he described autistic people. Autism destroys families, Kennedy said. More importantly, it destroys our greatest resource, which is our children. These are children who should not be suffering like this. These are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And he continued from there. As Kennedy described it, autism is a tragedy. He was very sad as he said all of this. Autism is a threat to families. It's a burden to society. Paying taxes, working hard, playing baseball, falling in love, those are carefully chosen words. I know this is the American dream. That's the good life that he's describing. And these kids, these poor kids, they're outside of that. They're never going to be able to live a good life. What a shame, what a pity, what a tragedy. These things that make life worth living. It's so sad that they can't live a good life. Maybe that's not what Kennedy meant. He was trying, in his own way, to make the case for helping. He wants to do something different because, to his eyes, the current approach doesn't seem to be helping. That's what he claims, assuming that he's speaking and acting in good faith. Who am I to judge? After the press conference, Kennedy's office was quick to backtrack, saying that he was only describing the most severe cases. He's not making a general statement about all people with autism. And there is a kind of truth to this description. Life is more difficult in many ways for many people and families on the autism spectrum. Some abilities are limited. There is suffering, especially for those with profound autism. That's the language preferred by many. Support is needed. Life looks different for many people on the spectrum. However, that is not a tragedy. Neurodivergence is so much more than the deficits that Kennedy described. There were lots of responses to Kennedy's speech on the internet. We're going to listen to one from a guy named Chris Winger, who is known on Instagram as the Speech Dude. Chris is a high school speech therapist who works with neurodivergent kids in Los Angeles. And here is part of the video conversation that he had with his followers on Instagram.
This person wants to know if those that require 24/7 care have maybe co-occurring conditions or high support needs provide to society. Here's your answer. We're not all here to produce. We're here to be. Some children will never grow up to pay taxes. They may never speak with mouth words. They'll have ways to communicate, but they may never walk on their own. They may rely on 24/7 care for their entire lives. And yet, they shape society. They ask us to slow down. They ask us to care, to notice, to value interdependence over independence. They ask us to recognize love without condition, to find joy in connection and not performance. These children shift perspectives. They teach empathy simply by existing. They give others permission to show up, to matter without even needing to earn it. They're not here to pay taxes or inspire or to teach a lesson, but in being fully themselves, they do open doors for a better world, because humanity is not a transaction, it's a shared experience, and their presence is a reminder of what it means to be fully human. And I hope that resonates with you.
Can you spot the difference? Kennedy's view of autism is a pretty common way of seeing disability. It's grounded in what I will call the myth of productivity. It's not an accident that the first thing on his list of tragedies for children with disabilities is that they will never pay taxes. If you don't contribute to society, if you actually cost more than you produce, you're not worth as much. If you don't hold down a job, if you don't create wealth, you're not worth as much. If you can't compete, if you don't create beauty, if you don't procreate, you're not worth as much. And if you need help to do basic human things like personal hygiene, then you're not worth as much. He doesn't say that part out loud, but that is the subtext, and not just in Kennedy's speech, but all around us. Your worth as a human being comes from what you produce and contribute. And if you don't, if you can't, especially if you cost more than you contribute, that makes your life a burden, a tragedy. That's a pretty strong narrative in our society. Again, we don't hear this out loud, but it's all around us. Not just about disability, but about worth and dignity in general. Our status, our power, our value is strongly tied to productivity. I feel that when I'm introduced to someone new at a party. So what do you do? I strongly dislike that question. I only work part-time. I'm just a pastor. I have always kinds of ways of disqualifying it. I feel this when Carrie asks me about my day. How was your day? Well, I just packed some lunches, I sent some emails, picked up the kids. But yeah, you go on and tell me about how you saved some senior with dementia who wandered off into minus 30-degree weather. You're a hero, and I am proud of you, but I suck. And I feel it when I see the person begging for change by the exit ramp. I feel it when I get in my minivan. I feel it when I choose the store brand of chips. These signals of value and comparison based on productivity are all over the place. The more you contribute, the more you're worth. Now, I call this a myth, but only in the sense that it is a story that we are telling ourselves. It's not true or false, it's just a way of making meaning out of the facts of our lives, a way of sorting information and giving weight to the things that we pay attention to as we make decisions. This is the overlap between politics and spirituality. Politics is a group discussion about the core truths, how we want to organize our collective lives, what we value, what we trust, and then how we want to live out of those shared ideals. That's politics, and that is faith as well. These questions about how resources are shared, who receives representation and support, they're political issues, and they're also spiritual. So myth isn't a negative word. It's a way of understanding and making meaning. And there is truth in this myth. Production does matter. Contributing is valuable, essential to meeting real human needs. Somebody needs to grow food, build houses, teach the children, pay the bills. Art and competition and relationships add beauty and meaning to life. If I don't contribute, if I don't participate in any of those things, if I spend all my time reading books and playing video games, there is a cost to that. Productivity matters. And it's not the only thing that matters. It's not the only thing that gives value to my life. The myth of productivity is in direct tension with what the speech dude describes, what I call the myth of inherent worth. We are not all here to produce. We are here to be. Being first, doing second. The value of what we produce comes out of the goodness, out of the inherent value of who we are. To put that in spiritual language, we are made in the image of God. Therefore, what flows out of us will be filled with the goodness of God. And yeah, sometimes that's aspirational. Sometimes the things that flow out of me are not all divine. We're not all sunshine and rainbows. But this aspiration, the longing, the attempt is also divine. Our worth, our identity, it comes out of that connection to God, our Maker. So when we look at someone else, whatever their abilities or capacity, we start with presence. They are present, therefore they are contributing. And rather than measuring the contribution to determine its value, we value the contribution first, and then we see how that is applied. So where Kennedy sees tragedy because of struggle and a perceived lack of production, the speech dude sees goodness coexisting alongside the struggle, in the struggle. He sees the goodness and then goes looking for what's the valued contribution here. I'm not a mathematician. You're probably wondering if the math adds up. And I will get to that in a minute. Yes is the short answer if you set up the equation the right way. We'll get there. Both of these are myths and stories that help us make meaning. They're both self-evident. You can't prove either. There's truth and opportunity to both. The elements are the same, but where we begin makes a huge difference. One sees tragedy, one sees gift. So the question is, what kind of world do we want to live in? From my perspective, these are not equal options. There's opportunity in both, and there's also a trap in the myth of productivity. Do you know the story of King David and Mephibosheth? Mephibosheth, that one's fun to say. From the Hebrew Bible, book of 2 Samuel. It's a real Game of Thrones type story. There's two royal houses, the present king, Saul, and his son Jonathan, versus the future king, David. David and Jonathan, one on each side, are actually friends. They have a love closer than a brother. So Jonathan is in this impossible position where he has to choose between father and friend, between the call of duty and the promise of love. And Jonathan is a good son. He chooses duty. He chooses his father. But before he and David part ways, they make the pledge that they will always look out for one another. And if the worst should happen, the survivor would care for the other's family. So, as the story goes, David and King Saul are in conflict. There's the beginnings of civil war. There's lots of fighting and fun stories. And then foreign armies come to take advantage of the civil war to invade. And King Saul and Prince Jonathan die on the battlefield against these foreign enemies, the Philistines. And David is left standing. He's able to claim the throne. Somewhere along the line, the rest of Saul and Jonathan's family is also killed. Not by good King David, he would never do such a thing, and he'd made this promise to Jonathan, but between the invaders and the other people trying to claim the throne, somehow all of Jonathan's siblings and his offspring are killed, allowing David to claim the throne. Except for Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was just 5 years old at the time, and his nanny helped him escape into exile. But somewhere along the way, Mephibosheth fell, perhaps he was dropped, and he was paralyzed, and he lost the use of his legs. So Mephibosheth goes off into exile. King David moves into the vacuum of the throne there and has lots of glorious uniting of the nation. Some years later, King David, being secure in his throne, remembered his promise to Jonathan. He remembered that he would look after his family, and I will put air quotes around remembered, because the story is written by people who love King David, and it's very convenient for King David that the only survivor happens to be someone who could never possibly claim the throne. So after this, David remembers finally his promise to Jonathan, and he asks around, are there any survivors? And somebody eventually located Mephibosheth and brought him to the king. And Mephibosheth thought that King David was going to do what kings do and kill him and eliminate the old royal line entirely. But instead, David recites his pledge to Jonathan, and he moves Mephibosheth into the palace and makes sure that Mephibosheth dines with the king at every opportunity. Now, again, this is told as a very heartwarming story about the benevolent King David. What a guy. He kept his promise to Jonathan. He also legitimized his connection to the previous regime, and he helped this poor Mephibosheth who could not help himself. Good for King David. But think about this story from Mephibosheth's perspective. When he was a kid, David's rebellion, and whether David was directly involved or not, but David caused the destruction of Mephibosheth's family. He caused the events that led to Mephibosheth's losing his mobility. He forced him into exile. And then when it was convenient for David, then Mephibosheth was welcomed back, forced to move to live in the palace that now belonged to this other guy. And he was forced to embrace this man who had caused his family's demise, who had stolen their throne. So Mephibosheth's needs were met, but this was no happily ever after for him. So King David is helping poor Mephibosheth overcome the struggles of his disability. That's the story. But the reality is that this is all about King David. He's really helping himself. And that's a real danger with the myth of productivity when it comes to people with disabilities. Because production equals value. When those of us with resources want to help, it often ends up just being about us. What we want, what we think is best, how we can help them become more like us, because while we want the best kind of life that they can have, and we want what we value, which is a productive life for them. So come on, come live at the palace. This is the best for everyone. The myth of productivity favors the results over the process. We want to solve the problem. We want to find the cure. That's the priority. Providing support, well, that's a long-term commitment. That's awfully inefficient. Giving people resources that is not going to translate into them becoming more productive, that sounds like a poor investment. I don't doubt that Robert Kennedy is sincere in his desire to help, but ignoring the community that you're supposedly helping, avoiding their input and minimizing their humanity, that is rather unhelpful. That is the current reality of Kennedy's department. He's announcing this research project to find the cause of autism. He wants to fix this tragedy, and at the same time, his administration is cutting the funding for ongoing supports for the neurodivergent community, which makes a kind of sense within the myth of productivity. We're going to solve the problem, and then we won't need all these supports, but it's very much in tension with the myth of inherent worth. The supports actually matter. What kind of world do we want to live in? Related to the myth of productivity in this discussion is the myth of independence. I mentioned the math of productivity. The value of something is the difference between its contributions, what it produces, and what it costs. That's a rather arbitrary way to measure value, from a spiritual existential point of view anyway. But the accountants in the room will insist that on a practical level, we need these books to balance. Income has to match or exceed expenses because a deficit doesn't work. We need value. The value has to come from somewhere. The myth of independence holds up that equation on a personal level. My contributions minus my expenses equals my value. And that has to balance somehow, or ideally grow in the positive direction. Again, that's solid accounting. I want to eat. I have to earn the equivalent value of the cost of food. If I don't, no eating, and eventually no living. That's the math behind Kennedy's concern for people who can't work, who can't use the toilet without help. Their needs are greater than their contributions, so the books don't balance. They are dependent, and that's not sustainable. This inherent value math, well, nothing is infinite. Everything is measurable. Resources are limited. Everything has a cost, so this just isn't practical. That's one way of seeing it. But what happens if we write the equation just a little bit wider? See, I know a thing or two about dependents. I've got 3 of them at home, kind of fond of them. And their financial contributions to the family budget is pretty meager. Their individual ledgers are entirely red. But within the family, we've been sustaining that for a good long while now. As a family unit, we're in the black, even with 3 dependents. In my family, those who have greater resources share freely with those who have greater needs. Not because I'm some hero. I don't begrudge them for any of that. Of course not. It's because love. As a family, we live out the myth of interdependence joyfully. Now, in that equation, I feel pretty good about myself because, well, I'm not dependent. I'm the provider, one of them. But of course, that's not the whole story either. If we make this circle just a little bit wider, well, this is awkward, but you all are a huge part of my financial circle. I am highly dependent on you. If you don't value my contributions, if you stop donating to the church, well, suddenly my books don't balance anymore. And that's only the beginning. You want to know a secret? I don't pay taxes. I mean, I file my taxes. I'm a solid, upstanding citizen, but I actually don't pay very much tax. There's a thing called the clergy residence deduction that the CRA has. It runs back to the days when churches used to provide housing for pastors. For whatever reason, the housing provided was not considered a taxable benefit. So as they've translated that along, now I don't have to pay taxes on the equivalent benefit of a housing cost. So up to a third of my income is tax-free. Love the rule, don't understand it, but plus I get the usual deductions for having dependents. I get deductions for childcare, for medical expenses, all that stuff. And on top of that, this is great, the government pays me to raise my children. We get a monthly payment. Most parents do, I think. Get like a couple $100 a month for each child, which is great. Doesn't meet all their needs, but it contributes for sure. And when you add all those things up, I don't pay taxes. I get taxes from some of you, no doubt. Thanks again. But I don't see myself that way. I see myself as a contributor. I mean, I work hard. I help to pay for the roads and the hospitals and the defense spending. I just laid it out. I don't actually, not currently, not directly, but I see myself as independent, even though I am a receiver more than a giver by that metric. But I'm actually highly dependent, not only on your generosity, I'm dependent on your overall competence. If you can't keep your jobs, if your savings run dry, if your investments fail, in spite of your best intentions, if you can't make donations and pay your taxes, well, I'm going down with you. So hey, I'm cheering for all of you. Keep it up. Back it up another step. I mean, I trust you all, but we are all well aware these days your financial well-being, and thus mine, is largely out of your control as well. Markets crash, customers stop spending, careers grow obsolete, inflation makes housing and food unaffordable, and that's all beyond you. You are all dependent. I'm dependent. My dependents are dependent, all the way down and back around. We don't want to be dependent, and we desperately play this game that I just described, trying to pretend that we are not. The Kennedys of the world insist they've got everything under control. And yeah, some people do have more than others. It's not equal. There are disparities in resources and power and, yes, abilities. Those things differ. Some are more dependent than others, perhaps. And some are eager and able to give that help. For every life that Robert Kennedy looks down on as a tragedy because they need help to use the toilet, there are more than enough people standing beside them. I will do this with you. And that is not tragic. That is awesome. Love more than covers any deficit that we may imagine. And again, we can choose. We can imagine ourselves as individuals, independent and in control, or we can be community for and with each other, the body of Christ. My body doesn't keep score of contributions and deficits. My heart doesn't get mad at my legs for making it work so hard. My intestines are a little irritated at all the junk that my mouth makes them deal with, but my brain doesn't care. It doesn't mind that my appendix is just along for the ride. Useless freeloader. The body is one, even though it has many parts. All the parts, many though they are, comprise a single body. So it is with Christ. So it is with everything. You are a part of me in ways that I do not yet know. And that's true with all of us. We can choose to see that or not. We can choose which of these to build our lives around. course, these are all just stories. There's a time and place for all of them. Sometimes I need to highlight my independence. I need to step up and take responsibility. Sometimes I need to value productivity. Those lunches do need to be packed and paid for. Most of the time, my sense is that our particular corner of the world gives more than enough attention to the productivity and independence stories. And that has a profound and practical impact on the lives of people with disabilities especially. And at the same time, this is not about disability. My own myths, my own insecurities, all of those things about me impact how I see and understand those around me, including those of diverse abilities. When I'm insecure about my own place within this productivity and independence model, when I'm unsure about my value, when I'm desperate to prove my worth, I tend not to treat other people so well. So we all need to hear this promise of inherent value. The image of God, the divine spark, the spirit of the infinite lives in you. I played that video from the speech dude, Chris Wenger, earlier. One of his friends on Instagram was inspired by his words, and she asked the parents of neurodiverse kids in her community to send her videos of their children, and she put those together into a video behind Chris's message. It's a delight to watch, and I'll end there.
We're not all here to produce. We're here to be. Some children will never grow up to pay taxes. They may never speak with mouth words. They'll have ways to communicate, but they may never walk on their own. They may rely on 24/7 care for their entire lives, and yet they shape society. They ask us to slow down. They ask us to care, to notice, to value interdependence over independence. They ask us to recognize love without condition, to find joy in connection and not performance. These children shift perspectives. They teach empathy simply by existing. They give others permission to show up, to matter without even needing to earn it. They're not here to pay taxes or inspire or to teach a lesson, but in being fully themselves, they do open doors for a better world, because humanity is not a transaction, it's a shared experience, and their presence is a reminder of what it means to be fully human.